Module 2. The Revolutionary War Era. The effect of the colonists on Native Americans. Native Americans faced numerous difficulties in maintaining their cultural independence on the frontiers of English and Spanish settlement. One major challenge was the encroachment of European settlers on Native American land, which often led to conflicts over land rights and resources. As Europeans established colonies and began to expand their territory, Native American tribes were forced to relocate and adapt to new environments. Another challenge was the spread of European diseases, which had a devastating impact on Native American populations. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza were introduced by European settlers and quickly spread among Native American communities, who had no immunity to these diseases. This led to a significant decline in Native American populations and weakened their ability to resist European settlement. The arrival of European missionaries and the spread of Christianity also had a significant impact on Native American culture. Many missionaries sought to convert Native Americans to Christianity and to civilize them by teaching them European ways of life. This often involved the suppression of traditional Native American beliefs and practices, which were seen as primitive or backwards by European standards. The establishment of European-style schools also had a significant impact on Native American culture. These schools often sought to assimilate Native American children into European culture and to suppress their traditional beliefs and practices. Native American children were often forbidden from speaking their native languages and were taught European customs and values. The Great Awakening. The Great Awakening was a religious revival that took place in the American colonies in the mid-18th century, beginning in the 1730s and lasting through the 1740s. It was a period of heightened religious fervor and spiritual renewal that had a profound impact on American society and culture. The Great Awakening was characterized by a focus on individual experience and personal conversion, and it encouraged people to question traditional forms of religious authority and to seek out new forms of spiritual expression. The revival was led by a number of prominent ministers, including Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, and Gilbert Tennant, who preached powerful sermons on the themes of sin, salvation, and redemption. One of the most significant ways in which the Great Awakening changed religious culture in colonial America was by encouraging greater diversity and freedom of religious expression. The revival led to the rise of new religious denominations and sects, and it encouraged people to question traditional forms of religious authority and to seek out new spiritual experiences. This helped to pave the way for the development of a more democratic and tolerant society, with greater religious freedom and pluralism. The Great Awakening also had a significant impact on American society and politics. It contributed to the development of a more democratic and egalitarian society, as people began to question traditional forms of authority and to seek greater political and social rights. The revival encouraged people to think for themselves and to challenge the established order, and it played a role in the development of American nationalism by fostering a sense of shared purpose and identity among the colonists. The 7-Year War. The 7 Years' War was a global conflict that began in 1756 and lasted until 1763. The war was fought primarily between France and Britain, but it also involved several other European powers, including Austria, Prussia, and Russia. The conflict eventually spread to other parts of the world, including the New World, where it had a significant impact on the colonial powers and the indigenous peoples of the region. The 7 Years' War became a global conflict primarily because of the colonial ambitions of the European powers. Both France and Britain had extensive colonial empires in the New World and elsewhere, and they were constantly vying for control of new territories and resources. The conflict between these two powers eventually escalated into a full-scale war, drawing in other European powers as well. In the New World, the 7 Years' War had a significant impact on the colonial powers and the indigenous peoples of the region. Because of the major impact that the war had on the colonies, they had colonial militia, which was important because it encouraged people who would have normally remained neutral to act and support America. The conflict was fought primarily in North America, with France and Britain battling for control of the lucrative fur trade and territorial expansion. The war had a significant impact on the indigenous peoples of the region, who were caught in the middle of the conflict and suffered significant losses as a result. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1763, expanding the British Empire and driving the French from the North American mainland. Guadeloupe and Martinique in the Caribbean were given back to France. Spain gained control of Louisiana. Britain gained control of Canada, Spanish Florida, and all the land east of the Mississippi River. Americans gained a feeling of national pride, drawing closer to Britain as they became more aware of being part of a great military and commercial empire. Americans gained a larger perspective of colonial America as thousands of young soldiers crossed the boundaries of their own colony and were exposed to the opportunities available in American beyond the plantation and village. Americans trained a corps of American officers who learned the British were not invincible. British officials charged Americans with ingratitude and used the argument to later justify parliamentary taxation in America. The lead-up to the American Revolution. The American colonists resisted parliamentary taxation for a variety of reasons. One of the main reasons was the principle of no taxation without representation, which held that the colonists should not be taxed by the British government without their consent. The colonists felt that they had no say in the decisions made by the British Parliament, which was made up of representatives elected by British citizens, and therefore they should not be subject to taxation by that body. Another reason for the resistance to parliamentary taxation was the economic impact it had on the colonies. The colonists believed that the taxes imposed by the British government were unfair and burdensome, and that they were being exploited for the benefit of the British economy. The colonists also resented the fact that the taxes were being used to pay for British military forces in the colonies, which were seen as unnecessary and oppressive. The colonists also felt that their rights as British subjects were being violated by the imposition of these taxes. They believed that they were entitled to the same rights and privileges as British citizens living in England, and that the taxes were a violation of their constitutional rights. During the 1760s, a series of events eroded the bonds of the British Empire, paving the way for the American Revolution. The colonies already had the Staple Act of 1663 that increased the cost of imports in the colonies, but when the Sugar Act in 1764, which placed new taxes on sugar and molasses imported into the colonies, when it was passed, along with multiple other taxes, it acted as the major catalyst of the American Revolution. The following year, the Stamp Act was passed, which required the use of stamped paper for all legal documents, including newspapers and pamphlets. The act was met with fierce opposition and led to the formation of the Sons of Liberty, a group of colonists who organized protests and boycotts in response to the new taxes. In 1766, the British government repealed the Stamp Act, but it passed the Declaratory Act, which asserted its authority to pass laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This was seen as a direct challenge to colonial self-government, and it contributed to growing tensions between the colonies and the British government. In 1767, the Townshend Acts were passed, which placed new taxes on imported goods such as tea, glass, and paper. This led to further protests and boycotts, and tensions between the colonies and the British government continued to escalate. The events of 1775 and 1776 were critical in leading to the colonists' decision to declare independence from Britain. The Revolutionary War. In April 1775, British troops marched on Concord to seize colonial military supplies, sparking the first military engagement of the Revolutionary War at Lexington and Concord. This led to a series of battles, including the Battle of Bunker Hill in June, which demonstrated that the colonial forces were capable of holding their own against the British Army. In the meantime, delegates from the colonies had been meeting in Philadelphia to discuss their grievances with the British government. In June 1775, they established the Continental Army, with George Washington as its commander-in-chief. They also issued the Olive Branch Petition, which sought to resolve the conflict with Britain through peaceful means. However, the British government refused to negotiate with the colonies, and in August 1775, King George III issued a proclamation declaring the colonies to be in a state of rebellion. The Revolutionary War was not an easy win for the colonies, the American prospect for victory seemed the bleakest in December of 1776 because the Continental Army lacked basic supplies and many men were ready to go home at the end of their enlistment. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published his pamphlet Common Sense, which argued that it was time for the colonies to declare independence from Britain. This was followed in June by a resolution introduced by Richard Henry Lee in the Continental Congress, which called for independence. On July 2, 1776, the Continental Congress voted in favor of Lee's resolution, and on July 4, they adopted the Declaration of Independence, which was drafted by Thomas Jefferson. The declaration declared that the colonies were free and independent states, and it listed a series of grievances against the British government. America post-Revolutionary War. The Articles of Confederation were the first Constitution of the United States, adopted by the Continental Congress in 1777 and ratified by the states in 1781. However, the Articles had a number of weaknesses that made it difficult for the new nation to function effectively. The U.S. Constitution replaced the Articles of Confederation because the Articles proved to be inadequate for governing the new nation after the Revolutionary War. The Articles established a weak central government that lacked the power to enforce its laws, regulate commerce, or provide for a strong national defense. As a result, the states had significant autonomy and often acted in their own self-interest, which led to conflict and instability. In addition, the Articles lacked a strong system of taxation. The central government had no power to tax, and instead relied on contributions from the states. However, many states refused to contribute or did so inconsistently, which made it difficult for the government to pay its debts and fund its operations. The weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation were highlighted by events such as Shays' Rebellion, a popular uprising in Massachusetts in 1786 that was fueled by economic hardship and a lack of government protection for farmers. The rebellion was put down, but it highlighted the need for a stronger central government. In response, delegates to the Constitutional Convention met in 1787 to draft a new constitution that would create a stronger central government with a system of checks and balances, a more robust system of taxation and national defense, and a framework for protecting individual rights and liberties. The U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1788 and has been the basis for American government ever since. The U.S. Constitution contains the Bill of Rights, which are made to protect the individual freedoms of the people. Nowadays, laws are not allowed to go against these laws, and the Supreme Court has the job to make sure that all laws passed do not go against the Constitution. An example of this is when the sedation laws caused distress because of fear that it violated the First Amendment rights. During the drafting of the United States Constitution, delegates were faced with difficult issues related to representation and slavery. In order to reach a compromise, they had to make concessions on both sides. On the issue of representation, there was a debate between larger and smaller states over how to apportion seats in the legislature. The larger states wanted representation based on population, while the smaller states favored equal representation for each state. The compromise that was reached was the Great Compromise, which created a bicameral legislature with a Senate and a House of Representatives. The Senate provided equal representation for each state, while the House was apportioned based on population. In order to stay updated, the government takes a census of the population every 10 years. This also helps to stay updated on the population of the country. For example, a census in 1810 showed that there was a large population increase due to a natural biological increase. The issue of slavery was a major issue due to the relatively ethnically and racially diverse population at this time. There was a division between northern and southern states over whether to count slaves in the population for the purpose of apportioning seats in the House of Representatives. The southern political leaders were determined to maintain the regional balance of the power in the Senate, so the compromise that was reached was the 3/5 compromise, which counted each slave as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of determining a state's population and therefore the number of seats in the House. The Constitution also contained provisions related to the issue of slavery, including the Fugitive Slave Clause, which required states to return escaped slaves to their owners, and the Slave Trade Clause, which prohibited Congress from banning the importation of slaves for 20 years. The debates over ratification of the United States Constitution in the late 1780s were characterized by a fundamental disagreement between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. While both groups were committed to the idea of a strong central government, they differed on a number of key issues. The Federalists believed that a strong central government was necessary to ensure the stability and prosperity of the new nation. They favored a strong executive branch, a bicameral legislature, and a federal judiciary with the power to strike down unconstitutional laws. The Federalists argued that the Constitution represented a balance of power between the national government and the states, and that it was necessary to preserve the Union and protect the rights and liberties of the American people. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, were skeptical of a strong central government and feared that it would infringe on the rights and liberties of the states and individuals. They believed that the Constitution gave too much power to the federal government and that it lacked adequate protections for individual rights. The Anti-Federalists favored a weaker central government, with more power reserved for the states and the people. The Anti-Federalists were also concerned about the lack of a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, which they believed was necessary to protect individual liberties. They feared that without such protections, the federal government would be able to trample on the rights of citizens with impunity.